Let me ask you something simple. What is a tree? Everybody's got an answer for that. A plant, a big plant, a thing with leaves and bark that grows in the ground. Fine, but I want to do something with you today. I want to take that answer, that comfortable, obvious answer, and I want to see how far it holds up, because I promise you it does not hold up very long at all. All right, so start here. A tree, at its most basic, is a tube. That's it. It's a hollow structure that moves water from the ground up to the leaves. The roots suck water in. The trunk carries it up. The leaves use it for something, and some of that water evaporates into the air. Plumbing. Nothing more mysterious than a garden hose, right? Fine, let's accept that for a moment. Now let me ask you this. How tall is a very tall tree? A coast redwood can stand over 100 meters. That's more than 300 feet. Some of the tallest ones ever measured come close to 116 meters. Think about that number. Water has to travel from the soil all the way up through the trunk, into the highest branch, into the last leaf at the very top. More than 100 meters straight up, against gravity. Every single day. And I'll tell you right now, by the time we're done, you will understand that a tree is doing something that no human engineer has ever come close to replicating. Not with copper, not with silicon, not with anything. Not with anything, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, if you remember a little physics, you know that atmospheric pressure can push water up a tube about 10 meters. That's a well-known number. 10 meters, that is the theoretical limit for suction. If you stuck a perfect vacuum pump on top of a straw and tried to pull water up, you'd get about 10 meters, and then the water column would break. A bubble would form. The atmosphere simply is not strong enough to push it any higher. This is not some minor technicality. This is hard physics. It does not matter how good your pump is or how narrow your tube is. Atmospheric pressure gives you 10 meters, and not 1 centimeter more. Galileo's students figured this out in the 1600s. Mine workers already knew it because they could never pump water out of deep shafts. There is a ceiling, and no clever engineering on Earth gets around it. So the tree is 100 meters tall. The atmosphere gives you 10. Where does the other 90 come from? Well, what about capillary action? That's the thing where water climbs up a narrow tube because the water molecules are attracted to the walls. You see it when you dip a thin glass tube into a cup of water, and the water creeps up higher inside the tube than outside. Sure, that helps a little. In the narrowest tubes inside the tree, they're called Xylem vessels, and some of them are only 20 or 30 micrometers across. Capillary action contributes something. But even in extremely thin tubes, capillary action alone might give you another meter or two at most. It is nowhere close to enough. So we've got 10 meters from atmospheric pressure, a couple more from capillary action, and the tree needs 100. We are off by a factor of 8 or 9. Something else is going on. Something nobody mentioned in your biology class. Here's what's actually happening. Up in the leaves, water is evaporating, not boiling, not spraying, just quietly slipping away through tiny openings called stomata. Each leaf might have tens of thousands of these openings. Microscopic pores. And when one water molecule leaves a leaf cell and drifts into the air, it tugs on the next water molecule behind it. And that one tugs on the next, and the next. This chain of pulling goes all the way down the tree, through every branch, down the trunk, and into the roots. The whole column of water is under tension, not pressure from below, tension from above. The water is being pulled from the top, not pushed from the bottom. Now, you might say, hold on. Water is a liquid. You can't pull on a liquid. A liquid has no rigidity. It'll just break apart and form a gap. And you would be absolutely right about most liquids, in most situations. Except water does something remarkable. Water molecules stick to each other with hydrogen bonds. Every water molecule can form up to 4 hydrogen bonds with its neighbors. And while any single bond is weak, trillions of them acting together create a staggering cohesive strength. In a narrow, perfectly clean tube, which is exactly what a Xylem vessel is, the tensile strength of a water column can be enormous. We are talking about negative pressures inside the tree of -10, -20, even -30 atmospheres. Negative pressure. That sounds strange, doesn't it? The water is literally being stretched like a rope being pulled from both ends. And it holds. It holds because the molecules refuse to let go of each other. There is a whole physics of liquids under tension that most people never encounter. We're used to thinking about pressure, squeezing fluids, pushing them through pipes. But a tree operates in the negative pressure regime. The water inside a tall tree on a hot day is in a thermodynamic state that would make an engineer nervous. It's metastable. It should cavitate, form bubbles, but it doesn't. Because the xylem vessels are smooth and clean and narrow enough that there are no nucleation sites for a bubble to start. So you've got this silent, invisible tug-of-war running from the roots to the crown. No pump, no motor, no moving parts at all, just evaporation at the top and molecular cohesion all the way down. A big oak might move 400 liters of water on a hot summer day using nothing but this mechanism. 400 liters against gravity without a single mechanical component. That alone is pretty stunning, right? But we haven't gotten to the part I really want to talk about. Because we haven't talked about charge yet. Water is not just water, not inside a tree. The water inside a tree is full of dissolved ions. Potassium, calcium, chloride, nitrate, magnesium, phosphate. The tree absorbs these from the soil through its roots, and they travel upward dissolved in the sap. So the fluid moving through those xylem vessels is not pure water. It is a conducting solution, an electrolyte. Chemically, it's not so different from the fluid inside a battery. And here is what nobody in your botany class ever mentioned. The walls of those xylem vessels are not electrically neutral. They carry a surface charge. The cellulose and lignin and pectin that make up the vessel walls have chemical groups, carboxyl groups, hydroxyl groups, that ionize when they contact water. This gives the inner walls of the vessel a slight negative charge. So you've got a charged fluid moving through a charged tube. I want you to think carefully about what that means physically. Picture this. You've got a pipe, and the inside of that pipe is coated with a thin layer of sticky material that grabs onto certain particles. Now you push a fluid through that pipe. The particles near the wall get snagged, held back. The particles in the middle of the flow sail right past. By the time the fluid reaches the far end, you've sorted the particles more of one kind at one end, more of another kind at the other. You've created a charge imbalance, a voltage. That is exactly what happens inside a xylem vessel. When a conducting fluid flows through a narrow channel with charged walls, the ions in the fluid do not all move at the same speed. The ions near the wall interact with the surface charge. They form what physicists call an electrical double layer, a thin skin of charge clinging to the wall's surface with a diffuse cloud of counterions extending into the fluid. When the bulk fluid moves, driven by transpiration, it drags these ion layers unevenly. The result is a net separation of charge along the length of the tube, and a separation of charge along a tube is a voltage. And this is called a streaming potential. Pure physics. Electrokinetics. It was first described in the 19th century for fluids moving through porous materials, and it applies beautifully to a tree. The tree is generating an electrical potential just by moving water. You can measure this. People have measured this. You stick 2 electrodes into a tree, one near the base, one higher up, and you detect a voltage difference. Millivolts. Small, but absolutely real and absolutely reproducible. And the voltage is not static. It changes with the rate of water flow. When transpiration is high on a hot afternoon, the streaming potential shifts one way. When the stomata close at night, it shifts again. On a cloudy day versus a sunny day, the voltage profile through the trunk is different. The tree is not just plumbing. It is an electrochemical column generating its own internal voltage gradients all day, every day, driven by nothing more than water flowing through charged channels. All right, that is layer 1. Water flow creates voltage. Let's go deeper. What is photosynthesis? You learned it in school. The plant takes sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and makes sugar and oxygen. Beautiful summary. Also a beautiful way to hide what is actually happening, which is far more interesting. Let me tell you what really goes on inside a chloroplast. A photon, a particle of light, arrives from the sun, travels 93 million miles through empty space, passes through the atmosphere, hits a leaf, passes through the outer cells, and lands on a pigment molecule sitting in a membrane inside a chloroplast. Chlorophyll. This pigment molecule is not just any molecule. It's sitting in a protein complex with about 200 other pigment molecules arranged in a precise antenna array. They funnel energy to a special pair of chlorophyll molecules at the center, called the reaction center. When the energy reaches this reaction center, something extraordinary happens. An electron gets kicked into a higher energy state. And instead of just falling back down and releasing the energy as heat or fluorescence, that electron gets grabbed, seized by the next molecule in line, which passes it to the next, a chain of molecular handoffs. Each molecule in the chain is carefully tuned by its shape, its chemistry, its position in the membrane to accept the electron and pass it forward. This is called the electron transport chain. Now stop right there. I want you to hear what I just described. An electron moving from one carrier to the next in a specific direction, driven by an energy source. That is a circuit. There is no other word for it. A solar-powered circuit. The photon provides the energy. The chlorophyll reaction center is the place where current originates. The chain of carrier molecules, there are about half a dozen of them, each one a specialized protein complex with names like plastoquinone and cytochrome. These are the components of the circuit. They step the electron's energy down in controlled stages, and at each stage the electron does useful work. But wait, if electrons keep leaving the chlorophyll reaction center, the chlorophyll runs out of electrons. It needs replacements. Where do they come from? Water. The tree rips electrons off of water molecules. Let that sink in for a moment. Water is one of the most stable molecules in ordinary chemistry. It takes serious energy to break water apart, but that is exactly what photosystem 2 does. It uses the energy of sunlight to crack water molecules open, pulling off electrons, releasing protons, and liberating oxygen as a waste gas. That oxygen drifts out of the leaf and into the atmosphere. The oxygen you are breathing right now was stripped off a water molecule by an enzyme in a leaf, and the energy to do it came from a photon that left the surface of the sun 8 minutes earlier. The electron that was stolen from that water molecule is now flowing through the transport chain. That is where the current comes from. What work? This is the clever part. As the electrons move through one section of this chain, specifically through the cytochrome B6F complex, they drive a pump. Protons, hydrogen ions, they get shoved from one side of the membrane to the other, from the stroma into the thylakoid lumen. Each electron that passes through pumps protons across. Now think about what accumulates. More and more protons pile up on one side of that membrane. Fewer and fewer on the other side. That is a concentration difference of charged particles across an insulating barrier. That is, by definition, a voltage, a real measurable electrical potential difference across a membrane only 5 to 8 nanometers thick. The field strength across that membrane, if you calculate it, comes out to something like 10 million volts per meter. That is a ferocious electric field, comparable to what you'd find in a capacitor in an electronic circuit. The thylakoid membrane inside a chloroplast is a charged capacitor, built by a tree, powered by sunlight. And that proton gradient, that voltage, does not just sit there. It drives a molecular machine called ATP synthase. It's a real physical machine. It has a rotor and a stator, just like an electric motor. Protons flow back through ATP synthase, down their concentration gradient, and as they do, they physically rotate part of the protein. It spins at around 100 revolutions per second, and each rotation forces a chemical reaction that assembles a molecule of ATP from its components. ATP is the energy currency the cell uses for everything: building proteins, transporting nutrients, repairing damage, growing. Every molecule of ATP in every living cell on Earth is manufactured by a tiny rotary engine driven by a proton voltage. In a tree, there are billions of these engines per leaf, all running simultaneously, all powered by the electron circuits in the thylakoid membranes, all driven, ultimately, by photons that left the sun 8 minutes ago. So in every single leaf above your head, right now, trillions of electron transport chains are running. Photons arrive, electrons flow through molecular wires, protons get pumped across membranes, voltage builds up, rotary turbines spin, and chemical energy gets stored. This is not a metaphor. I am not being poetic. When I say the tree is an electrical circuit, I mean the electrons are literally flowing. The voltage is literally there. You could, in principle, stick an electrode in there and measure it. And researchers have inserted electrodes into living trees and harvested tiny amounts of electrical power. Not enough to run your house, enough to power a small sensor. The electricity is real. Now let's go one more layer. Because so far we've been inside cells. Let me zoom out to the whole organism. You cut a leaf, you tear it, An insect bites into it. What happens? Within seconds, sometimes within a fraction of a second, an electrical signal travels away from the wound site. Not a chemical slowly diffusing through tissue. An electrical signal. A wave of voltage change that propagates through the plant at speeds of roughly 1 to 10 centimeters per second. It is slow compared to an animal nerve impulse. A motor neuron in your arm conducts at maybe 50 meters per second. But the basic phenomenon is identical. Ion channels open in the cell membrane. Potassium rushes out, calcium rushes in. The voltage across the membrane swings dramatically, maybe by 100 millivolts or more. That swing triggers the next cell to open its channels. And the next, like a row of dominoes falling, except the dominoes are voltage spikes. These are called action potentials, the exact same term used for nerve signals in your brain and muscles. A man named Jagadish Chandra Bose was demonstrating this over 100 years ago. Working in Calcutta in the early 1900s, he built extraordinarily sensitive electrical instruments and showed that plants produce measurable electrical responses to stimuli. Touch them, wound them, expose them to certain chemicals, heat them, cool them, they fire electrical signals. He published books about it, gave lectures at the Royal Institution in London. Some scientists were fascinated, others were skeptical, even dismissive. The idea that plants could have anything resembling electrical signaling seemed absurd to the biology establishment of his time. But his measurements were correct. Modern electrophysiology confirms virtually everything Bose reported. A tree does not have a brain. It does not have neurons. It does not have a nervous system in any anatomical sense. But it has ion channels. It has membrane potentials. It has propagating electrical signals that carry information from one part of the organism to another. It has the physics of electrical communication, different hardware than an animal uses. Slower, more diffuse. But electrically, the underlying principle is the same. Charge moves through selective channels, voltages change, and information about the environment travels across the organism. What does the tree do with this information? When a caterpillar starts chewing on a leaf near the base of the tree, leaves farther away, leaves the caterpillar hasn't touched, begin producing defensive chemicals, jasminators, protease inhibitors, compounds that make the leaves taste terrible or become harder to digest. These distant leaves start their chemical defense before any airborne signal could have reached them and before any wounded cell chemicals could have diffused through the vascular tissue. The electrical signal got there first. It is the fastest long-distance communication the tree has, and it is not just wound responses. Some plants fire electrical signals when the light changes abruptly, when the temperature drops suddenly, when they detect certain chemicals in the soil water. The mimosa plant, the one that folds its leaves when you touch them, that folding is driven by an action potential that triggers motor cells at the base of each leaflet. Touch one leaf, and the electrical wave races along the stem, collapsing leaflets in sequence like a cascade. You can watch it happen in real time. That is an electrical signal driving a mechanical response, fast enough to see with your naked eye. So let me assemble the full picture, because we've been adding layers one at a time, and I want you to see the whole machine at once. At the molecular level, inside every green cell, photons from the sun drive electrons through precisely arranged transport chains embedded in membranes. That electron flow pumps protons, creating voltage gradients across membranes only nanometers thick. Those gradients spin molecular turbines that produce the chemical energy the tree runs on. Solar-powered electrical circuits at the nanometer scale. Billions per leaf. At the cellular level, every single living cell in the tree maintains a voltage difference across its outer membrane. The inside is more negative than the outside, typically by around -100 to -200 millivolts. Ion pumps, proteins that use ATP to shove potassium and sodium and chloride against their concentration gradients, work constantly to maintain this charge separation. Every cell is a tiny battery. A tree has billions of cells, billions of tiny batteries. At the tissue level, water flowing through negatively charged Xylem vessels generates streaming potentials that create a measurable voltage field running from the roots to the canopy. This field is not static. It fluctuates with weather, with time of day, with the season. It responds to drought, to rain, to wind. And at the organism level, electrical action potentials propagate through the plant in response to wounding, touch, temperature changes, light to dark transitions, and other environmental stimuli. These signals coordinate defensive responses, growth adjustments, and metabolic changes across the whole body of the tree. 4 overlapping electrical systems, all running simultaneously, all coupled to each other. The streaming potentials are affected by the ion concentrations maintained by the cellular batteries. The action potentials are powered by the membrane voltages. The photosynthetic circuits supply the ATP that keeps the ion pumps running. Everything connects. Disturb one system and the others respond. Cut off the light and the photosynthetic circuits stop, which means less ATP, which means the ion pumps slow down, which means the membrane voltages drift, which affects the action potentials. Drought closes the stomata, which slows transpiration, which changes the streaming potentials, which alters the ion distribution in the xylem. It's a coupled network, not a collection of independent parts, and that is what I find deeply fascinating about this. We split the world into electrical and biological as if those are different categories. We have a word for things that conduct electricity, conductors, and a word for things that do not, insulators. And somehow we placed living organisms in a completely separate bin. We talk about tree biology as if it runs on chemistry alone, but the chemistry is electrochemistry. The signals are electrical signals. The energy transduction is electron flow through molecular circuits. We have been staring at electrical machines this whole time and calling them something else because they are made of wood and cellulose instead of copper and silicon. Think about a forest, an entire forest, millions of trees. Each one is a complex electrochemical network, their roots intertwine underground, sometimes grafting together, literally fusing vascular tissue so that water and ions flow freely between individuals. A Douglas fir and the tree next to it might share a root graft that is electrically a direct wire between two networks. Vast fungal networks, mycorrhizae, connect root systems across the forest floor. The fungal threads are thin, but they are everywhere, threading through the soil in densities that are hard to fathom. Ions and sugars and water move between trees through these connections. The electrical potentials of individual trees are not isolated. They overlap. They interact through shared root grafts and shared fungal conduits. When one tree's water flow changes, the ion concentrations in the shared soil shift, and the neighboring trees feel it electrically. I'm not going to claim the forest is thinking. That would be silly. But I will tell you that the forest is electrically active in ways we have barely begun to map. If you could see electrical potential the way you see color, a forest floor would shimmer. There are voltage gradients threading through the soil, coupling tree to tree, shifting with every rainstorm that changes soil conductivity, every sunny afternoon that drives the photosynthetic circuits harder, every cold night that slows the ion pumps down. Dig up a shovel of forest soil, and you're holding a tangle of living wires. We talk about ecosystems in terms of energy flow, sunlight to producers, producers to herbivores, herbivores to predators. But almost nobody talks about the electrical dimension of that energy flow. And it is there, it was always there, the physics is always applied. We just were not asking the right questions. Let me leave you with something to sit with. We build circuits out of refined metals and ultra-pure silicon. We etch transistors a few nanometers wide in billion-dollar fabrication facilities. We are very proud of our electrical engineering, and we should be. But consider what a tree does. It builds its circuits out of water, cellulose, lignin, and dissolved minerals. No refining, no cleanroom, no factory, no wiring diagram designed by an engineer. It grows the whole thing from a seed smaller than your fingernail. These circuits run on sunlight, repair themselves when damaged, adapt their performance to changing conditions, reproduce themselves so that new circuits can grow from the old one's offspring, and when they finally stop working after decades or centuries, they decompose back into the soil to become raw material for the next generation of circuits. I told you at the beginning that no human engineer has come close to replicating what a tree does. Now you know why. It's not that we lack the materials. It's that we haven't figured out how to build a circuit that grows itself, fixes itself, powers itself, and recycles itself all at the same time. The tree solved that problem a few 100 million years ago and never made a fuss about it. We have been living among the most elegant electrical systems nature has ever produced, and we have been calling them scenery. Every time I walk under a big tree on a hot summer afternoon, I think about this. Above me, trillions of electrons are cascading through transport chains. Protons are being rammed across membranes. Voltage gradients are humming through the xylem. Action potentials are whispering from leaf to leaf. Tiny turbines are spinning at 100 revolutions per second. All of it invisible, all of it silent, all of it powered by nothing but water and light. So the next time someone asks you what a tree is, try this. Tell them it is a self-assembling, solar-powered, water-cooled electrical network that has been running continuously for 50 or 100 years, requires no external maintenance, manufactures its own fuel, builds its own replacement parts, and sequesters carbon as a side effect. And then watch their face. I'd love to know what is the most surprising thing you learned here. Which layer caught you off guard? Tell me the one that made you stop and reconsider what you thought you knew.